If you ask someone to audit a business, pretty much everyone knows exactly what to do, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a whole established process.
Yeah. I mean, you bring in the accountants, they open up the spreadsheets, they look at the profit and loss
They
margins.
check the inventory.
Exactly. They check the inventory and they point to a bottom line. They can tell you exactly what the enterprise is worth in these very dry, clinical numbers.
Right, which is incredibly comforting because it's completely tangible. You can see it.
Yes.
Oh, boy.
But when you take that exact same mechanism, like that rigorous, unflinching evaluation, and you turn it inward to apply it to human character, those spreadsheets just, well, they become useless.
Yeah, the metrics completely fall apart.
Yeah.
You were no longer measuring material reality or financial accumulation.
Right.
You are stepping into the absolute definition of an internal reckoning. And the currency there is totally different.
Totally different. Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to take this really unique stack of sources we've gathered for you, and we're going to build a framework for something called the inner audit.
I love this concept.
It's so good. We are pulling from the legendary management guru Peter Drucker, ancient Stoic philosophy, modern sports psychology, and even biblical wisdom.
Quite the mix.
Seriously. We are going to figure out how to evaluate your interior enterprise. And this deep dive is designed specifically for you, the learner who really wants to cut through all the daily noise and figure out how to measure what actually matters in your life.
It is such a profound synthesis of ideas to explore. Taking the architectural framework of how to govern a massive corporation and then using those exact same structural principles to figure out how to govern a soul.
Yeah, and actually looking at your desk right now, you've got this amazing visual going on. You've literally stacked Peter Drucker's corporate management manuals right on top of these ancient scrolls from Epictetus and Seneca.
I didn't even realize I did that, but yeah.
I love the visual contrast. It perfectly captures where we need to start. So, okay, let's unpack this. Let's unpack Drucker's observation about pension funds, because it kind of provides the ultimate foundation for this whole concept.
Yeah, so Drucker made this brilliant observation about how modern capital works. He noted that pension funds have essentially become the dominant owners of corporate America.
Like, they own the lion's share of the stock market.
Exactly. But because of their nature as these massive, abstract financial entities, they are completely disconnected from the daily operations of the businesses they actually own.
Right, they're just asset managers sitting in a tower somewhere.
Yes, they hold fractions of companies that are way too massive and honestly way too abstract to inspect firsthand on like a random Tuesday afternoon.
I mean, they aren't down on the factory floor checking the machinery.
Of course not.
Or sitting in the break room feeling the company culture. They are literally absentee owners.
Drucker realized that this massive disconnect creates a dangerous vulnerability. So his remedy for that vulnerability is the formal business audit.
A periodic, highly structured, unapologetic evaluation.
Exactly. You don't just glance at the stock price and assume everything is fine. You start with the core mission and strategy, and then you systematically work outward.
Right. You evaluate the marketing, the innovation pipeline.
The productivity of the workforce,
Yeah.
the actual profitability. It requires predetermined standards, applied honestly at regular intervals.
Okay, and this is where our sources just flip this entire corporate concept upside down and aim it right at the mirror. Because think about it. We all know we shouldn't let our 401ks or our retirement accounts run on autopilot, right?
Right, without ever checking the statements.
Exactly. Yet we so often let our own moral and internal lives run on complete unchecked autopilot.
We are the absentee owners of our own character.
Oh, that's such a good way to put it. We assume everything is fine just because there hasn't been a catastrophic crash yet. So the big question is, how do we actually take Drucker's corporate audit and run it on a human soul?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the very first finding of this personal audit completely inverts the logic of a business audit.
How so?
So when a company is audited, the auditors track net worth, accumulated assets, line items. They're measuring what the company has.
Right, the stuff.
Exactly. But when you look at the personal audit, particularly through the lens of the Stoics in our sources, it tracks needs. The opening question of the inner audit isn't, what do I have? It's, what do I need?
Oh, wow. So it's an audit of your dependencies.
That is the perfect way to phrase it.
Yeah.
Yes. Seneca writes extensively about letting fate find us prepared and active. He argues that a weak soul spends all its energy fighting reality,
Like trying to correct the faults of the universe.
or demanding that the outside world cater to its desires. But the prepared soul focuses entirely inward. And the mechanism here is leverage.
Leverage.
The less a person needs from the outside world,
Yeah.
the fewer external dependencies they rely on for happiness or stability, the less anyone or anything can hold over them.
Which brings up that legendary encounter from the sources between the philosopher Diogenes and Alexander the Great. I mean, it illustrates this leverage dynamic perfectly.
Oh, it really does.
Because Alexander is literally the most powerful man on the planet. He commands armies, he controls continents, he can grant immense wealth, status, power,
Or
or...
lethal punishment to anyone he chooses.
Exactly. And he walks up to Diogenes, who is living in absolute poverty on the street, like owning nothing. And Alexander asks if he can do anything for him.
And Diogenes just looks up.
And he says, yeah, you can step aside. You're blocking my sunlight.
I mean, it is often framed as this funny historical anecdote, but it is actually the ultimate power move.
It really is.
Because Alexander's entire empire was built on leverage, his ability to give people what they wanted or take away what they needed. Diogenes neutralized the most powerful man in the world simply by having zero external needs.
Alexander had the throne, but Diogenes had the satisfied mind.
And, as our sources emphasize, the satisfied mind outranks the throne every single time. Because a satisfied mind cannot be bought, coerced, or leveraged.
Okay, I do want to push back on the practical application of this, though, because, I mean, is the lesson here that we all need to go live in a barrel on the street and abandon our possessions to be truly free?
No, no.
Because that feels like extreme asceticism, not a practical audit for someone listening to this, on their morning commute.
Right, right. The physical poverty of Diogenes is extreme, but it's a physical manifestation of a psychological principle. It's not about throwing away your belongings. It's about examining your psychological attachments to them.
Okay, that makes sense.
Like if your sense of self-worth is entirely dependent on getting a specific promotion, your boss essentially owns a piece of your soul.
Yeah.
They have leverage over your internal state. So the inner audit asks, are you accumulating so many external needs that you are constantly vulnerable to being controlled by them?
That perfectly parallels the story of Epictetus from the sources, too. Because here is a man who was literally legally enslaved in the household of Emperor Nero.
Yeah.
And he is surrounded by all these incredibly wealthy, high-status Roman elites who technically have their freedom. Yet Epictetus realizes that he possesses something those aristocrats couldn't buy.
Self-possession.
Yes, he had self-possession.
He was legally bound, but internally untouchable.
Yeah.
Those Roman elites who looked down on him, they were actually slaves in a much deeper sense.
Enslaved to their ambitions.
Their ambitions, their insatiable greed, and their constant, terrifying need for Nero's approval. Epictetus governed the empire between his ears. The aristocrats let Nero govern theirs.
Wow. So, okay, if the first step of this inner audit is evaluating our dependencies, like auditing what we need, then we inevitably have to audit what we lose.
Right.
Every business audit looks at losses, write-offs, depreciation. But here is where the inner audit takes a really fascinating turn. The sources argue that in the interior enterprise, true losses are never actually taken from you by force.
This is a crucial distinction, and it really separates the corporate from the personal.
Right.
A business audit measures forced losses. A competitor aggressively steals your market share, or a supply chain crisis destroys your profit margin. You didn't choose those losses. They were inflicted on you.
But when we look at the personal audit, especially through that historical pressure cooker of Nero's court, the mechanics of loss operate entirely differently.
And Nero's court really was the ultimate testing ground for human character. The man was a volatile tyrant.
Yeah, he could confiscate your generational wealth, strip your political title, throw you in a dungeon, or execute you on a whim.
He could take everything material. But the Stoics insist there is one specific asset even a tyrant with an army cannot seize without your active consent.
Your dignity.
Your dignity, your core values, your self-respect.
Okay, wait, let me stop you there because I have to challenge this premise. Wait, if a tyrant literally has a sword to your neck or threatens your family unless you do something horrific, isn't that taking your dignity by force?
It's a tough pill to swallow.
It feels incredibly harsh, like almost victim blaming, to say, well, you gave it away.
It is a really heavy, uncomfortable concept to wrestle with, for sure. But the distinction the Stoics make is between physical compliance and internal surrender.
Okay.
Look at the historical examples provided in the text. Agrippinus and Thrasea, they were prominent men in Nero's orbit.
Right.
When Nero demanded the Senate validate his murderous edicts, they simply refused to participate in the charade. They wouldn't attend the banquets. They wouldn't applaud the atrocities.
And they faced severe lethal consequences for this.
Yes, they did. But they kept their self-respect intact because they refused to internally validate the tyrant's reality. They lost their lives, but they didn't lose their souls.
Which brings us to the tragic counterexample of Seneca, because here's where it gets really interesting. Seneca didn't face a sword to the neck demanding he immediately abandon his philosophy.
No.
His loss wasn't a sudden, violent extraction. It was a slow, voluntary compromise.
Seneca was one of the greatest moral philosophers of his age, yet he stayed incredibly close to Nero's power. He wrote Nero's speeches.
Including the one justifying the murder of Nero's own mother.
Exactly. So how does a brilliant philosopher do that? He didn't just wake up evil. He rationalized it. He told himself he was a moderating influence on a monster. He convinced himself that if he left, someone worse would take his place.
He audited himself right into moral bankruptcy.
By making 1,000 small, seemingly justifiable accommodations to just stay in the room where it happens, he surrendered his values piece by piece.
There is a quote from Sophocles in the sources that just hits like a freight train here. He says, "Whoever makes his journey to a tyrant's court becomes his slave, although he went there a free man."
Man, that's powerful.
Right. Seneca went in free, and he became a slave to his own rationalizations. And that highlights the most devastating finding an inner audit can reveal. Our greatest personal losses aren't seized from us in a dramatic confrontation. They are surrendered quietly in the dark.
And that forces a really uncomfortable mirror onto anyone running this audit. It's incredibly easy for us to sit here centuries later and judge Seneca for selling out.
So easy.
But if one of history's greatest, most educated philosophical minds can trick himself into compromising his core values, the audit demands that we confront the exact same capacity for failure within ourselves.
It's like stress testing a bridge. You don't test the structural integrity of a suspension bridge by driving a featherlight bicycle over it and declaring it safe.
Right, you look for the hidden microfractures.
Exactly, by applying heavy, relentless weight.
Hmm.
A business audit that only ever produces glowing positive news is totally useless. It's just a rubber stamp to stroke the CEO's ego.
Yep.
The same goes for us. If your inner audit never finds a moment where you rationalized a bad choice or quietly compromised your integrity, you just aren't looking hard enough.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we realize we have to look at the underlying mechanisms of how good people make the wrong calls under pressure.
Okay.
The sources provide a fascinating pattern here. Take Cato. Cato was the ultimate defender of the Roman Republic. He was known for his absolute, unyielding moral rigidity.
You wouldn't bend on anything.
But that very rigidity, his refusal to compromise even slightly on political procedure, accidentally pushed Pompey right into the arms of Julius Caesar.
Which helped destroy the very republic Cato was trying to save.
Exactly. His failure wasn't corruption, it was a lack of pragmatic wisdom.
Or look at Rusticus. I mean, he was a highly respected Stoic teacher and magistrate, yet he ended up sentencing Justin Martyr to death.
Right.
He probably didn't do it out of, like, mustache-twirling malice. He likely told himself, well, the law is the law, my hands are tied, I have to maintain civil order.
Bureaucratic evil.
Exactly. Even Marcus Aurelius, the emperor, whose personal diary is literally the gold standard for moral self-reflection, he allowed the brutal, systematic persecution of Christians during his reign. He had a massive moral blind spot.
And the most relatable example of this mechanism comes from Anne Rowe's historical portrait of Pontius Pilate.
Oh, this was fascinating.
Yeah, it draws on a really interesting reflection by former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. Blair noted that Pilate commands our moral attention precisely because he was not a pure villain.
He was just a middle manager.
He was so nearly a good man. Pilate examined Jesus, saw that he had done nothing wrong, and his initial instinct was to do the right thing and release him.
But then the political math kicked in.
Yep.
He let his advisors talk him out of it. Like, he weighed the moral right against the political cost of a riot, the threat to his career, the anger of his superiors in Rome, and he just caved.
He washed his hands of it, literally and metaphorically.
And that is the terror of the inner audit. These figures weren't monsters. They were humans who were tested, and they made the wrong call based on the exact same rationalizations we use every single day.
The capacity for compromise is not some historical defect unique to men in togas. It is a standing capacity in anyone.
Including you, the listener.
Yes. Naming that capacity plainly, bringing it out into the glaring light of the audit, is really the only way to keep it from operating unexamined in your own life.
Okay, so If we accept this heavy premise that we all possess this latent capacity to fail the inner audit, to be Pilate or Seneca in our own lives, we have to figure out how to calibrate the audit itself.
Right.
Because a corporate audit relies on generally accepted accounting principles. It has massive rule books and compliance manuals that define what is correct. What is the standard we measure a soul against? You can't just download a PDF for human morality.
Right. The standard for a personal audit, according to our sources, doesn't come from a document or a theoretical philosophy. It comes from a person.
Oh, okay.
The benchmark has to be an embodied example.
Like Marcus Aurelius learning from his stepfather, Antoninus.
Exactly. Marcus lost his own father at a very young age, but he was gifted a stepfather who became, in the words of the historian Ernest Renan, the most beautiful model of a perfect life. And what is crucial to understand about Marcus's development is that he didn't memorize a list of Antoninus's lectures. He watched him live.
He observed him.
He observed his compassion, his consistent cheerfulness, his willingness to yield to experts when he didn't know the answer, and his total indifference to superficial honors. He absorbed the standard because he saw it operate under pressure.
It reminds me of the sports coaching analogy mentioned in our sources. If you've ever played on a highly competitive team, you know that the actual culture of that team isn't whatever inspirational quote the head coach printed on a poster in the locker room.
No, not at all.
Because words on a page don't bleed when they get cut. The standard the team internalizes is based purely on what the coach actually does when the team is down by 10 points with 2 minutes left on the clock.
Do they panic? Do they scream and blame the referees?
Or do they stay composed and focused? So what does this all mean for us? Our internal standard is set by who we choose to emulate when the pressure is on.
And Epictetus discovered the exact same dynamic back in his days of slavery. He found a freedom that Roman law couldn't touch by studying under his teacher, Musonius Rufus.
Right.
Musonius didn't just teach him abstract logic. He modeled how a human being governs that great empire between our ears. He showed him how to control his attitudes, his desires, and his opinions.
So freedom, in this context, isn't a legal status granted by a piece of paper. It is an active choice you make, modeled by those you revere.
Yes.
But, okay, what if you don't have an Antoninus or Musonius Rufus in your life? Like, what if you are surrounded by flawed people?
That's a fair point.
The sources show that this idea of an internal standard spans across completely different cultural and religious traditions. You have Tolstoy arguing that the voice of conscience is literally the voice of God speaking within us.
Right.
You have Kant and Emerson and ancient Brahmin wisdom, all pointing to this idea that a pure, virtuous heart is the doorway to the divine, serving as its own internal compass.
And we see this sharpened into a stark choice of loyalty in Jesus' teaching in the Gospels, too. You cannot serve two masters.
Right, God and mammon.
Exactly. You cannot serve both God and mammon, which represents material wealth and earthly success. And the rationale is purely auditable.
How so?
Well, earthly treasures, the stuff a business audit measures, the status, the bank accounts, it decays, it gets eaten by moths, it rusts, it gets stolen, or it simply loses its value. But the treasure of the heart, the integrity of the inner empire, does not decay. You have to choose which ledger you are trying to balance.
Having that standard, though, whether it's knowing who your Antoninus is or tuning into that voice of conscience, it is completely useless if you don't have the discipline to execute the audit every single day.
So true.
Which brings us to the actual practical application of all this philosophy. How do we run this audit on a Tuesday morning?
Well, the sources offer a few practical diagnostics for running this daily evaluation. The first step is identifying the quiet, insidious ways we fail to run it at all.
Oh, avoidance.
Exactly. Shakespeare provides a brilliant warning here. Doubt is a traitor. It makes us lose the good we might otherwise win simply because we are too afraid to even attempt the evaluation. We're scared of what the audit might find, so we avoid it entirely.
So if you are listening to this right now, the sources pose a really challenging, direct question for you. Are you inventing things to do to avoid the important work?
Ouch.
Are you filling your day with endless busy work, like optimizing your morning routine and checking off minor tasks just to avoid sitting in silence and auditing your own character?
Jacques-Marie Boutet defines virtue as moderation, doing just what is correct, no more, no less. He argues that any excess is a defect.
Even excessive working.
Yes. If we're obsessively working, even on seemingly productive or good things, simply to avoid looking inward, that excess becomes a liability. It's a distraction technique to keep the auditors out of the building.
Pauline Kieser uses this incredible imagery of roots and branches to explain how a healthy audit should function. She describes us as needing both. The roots are what hold us in place, that fixed standard of conscience, the lived model of an Antoninus, the undivided loyalty to a core set of values. But the branches are what let us stretch, explore, and grow. A healthy audit has to fiercely protect the roots, but it must constantly challenge the branches to reach further into the unknown.
And that reaching, that growth, is not a comfortable process.
No.
The sources bring in Lionel Messi's relentless ambition to illustrate this. He doesn't just want to be great, he wants to get better and better every single day, which requires constantly finding his own flaws.
And Stephen Kotler observes that the greatest creatives and performers are the ones who fail often.
They run the audit, find the deficiencies, and attack them.
Because growth isn't just this steady, painless, upward graph of improvement that you can put on a PowerPoint slide. It is repeated, willing failure. You have to be willing to fail toward a standard that never lowers its expectations of you.
This raises an important question, though, about whether our personal audits have just become formalities, because achieving that requires immense humility. The final pieces of wisdom we have, Proverbs 9.9 and an ancient anonymous fragment, remind us that instructing the wise makes them wiser still.
There is always someone who can teach you something.
Even a child can reveal a flaw in your patience or your kindness. The absolute moment your inner audit stops looking for teachers, the moment it assumes it has nothing left to learn, it stops being a genuine audit.
It just becomes a bureaucratic formality designed to protect your ego.
Exactly.
You just end up rubber stamping your own behavior, telling yourself you are the moderating influence, just like Seneca.
Exactly. The true calibration of the inner audit requires the humility to be constantly taught and corrected.
Well, let's pull all these threads together. Today, we set out to build a framework for evaluating the interior enterprise. And here is what this unique inner audit actually finds.
Let's hear it.
It measures our true wealth by how little we need from the outside world, not how much we accumulate. It recognizes that our dignity and our core values can never be taken from us by force. They can only be surrendered by our own quiet consent.
Beautifully said.
It forces us to look in the mirror and accept our own latent capacity to compromise under pressure, just like Seneca or Pilate. It relies on the embodied, lived example of a role model to set the standard. And finally, it demands a daily, humble practice of productive failure and constant learning.
It's a rigorous, often uncomfortable process, but it is really the only way to ensure that the empire between our ears is actually governed well.
As we wrap up this deep dive, there is one final, profound implication of taking this corporate metaphor and applying it to the soul. I want to pass it over to you to explain this last concept because it highlights the ultimate trap of the inner audit.
Yeah, so if you are both the corporation being audited and the pension fund conducting the audit, you are facing a profound fundamental conflict of interest.
Right, because you are evaluating yourself.
Exactly. So the question you have to explore on your own today, long after this deep dive ends, is this. How do you prevent your internal CEO, your ego, your pride, your deep desire for comfort and validation from falsifying the books and bribing the internal auditor, your conscience? How do you keep the audit honest when you are the one holding the pen?
A question definitely worth taking into the rest of your day. So as you head back out into the noise, keep this final grounding mantra from our sources in mind. Calm body, quiet mind. Play hard, play smart, play together.